The church doors swung open, and every head turned. Rachel stepped inside. Her emerald dress shimmered under the light, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her hair was flawless, her skin glowing. But it wasn't just her entrance that silenced the crowd. It was what came after. A Cadillac Escalade had just dropped her off outside. And now, 3 children, her triplets, walked proudly beside her, holding her hands. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "Is that Rachel? What is she doing here? Wait, those kids, who do they belong to?" At the altar, James froze. The man in his crisp white suit, the groom of the day, the man who once called her nothing, he couldn't breathe. Because Rachel, the poor black ex-wife he had abandoned, the woman his family mocked for being beneath them, had just walked into his perfect white wedding, glowing brighter than anyone in the room. The whispers got louder. Some people sneered, their voices dripping with contempt. "She doesn't belong here. Look at her, trying too hard." James traded up. Why would he ever go back to that? Rachel heard every word. She felt every stare. 4 years she had lived in that shadow, the shadow of being not enough because of her race, her money, her background. But today, she wasn't here to hide. She was here to be seen. She tightened her grip on her children's hands and walked slowly, gracefully, down the aisle, not to congratulate James, but to confront him. And James? His smile was gone. His new bride glanced at him in confusion, whispers sparking around her like fire. Rachel stopped halfway down the aisle. Her eyes locked with James's. Her voice cut through the silence. "Did you really think I wouldn't come, James? Did you really think I'd stay invisible forever?" The crowd gasped. The bride's face turned pale. And James, his perfect image, began to crack. High Voltage, if you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Because trust me, you haven't heard the half of this story yet. High Voltage. Because what Rachel was about to reveal would burn James's empire to the ground. Years before that wedding, Rachel was just a 22-year-old girl with big dreams. She worked double shifts at a diner, serving coffee with a smile, even when her feet ached and her tips barely covered rent. She believed in love back then. She believed in James. James was everything she thought she wanted. Tall, charming, with promises that sparkled brighter than the diamond ring he slid onto her finger. He came from money, from a family that looked at Rachel the way people look at a stain on their white tablecloth. The first time she met his parents, she never forgot it. His mother didn't even bother hiding her disgust. "She's interesting," she said, her eyes flicking over Rachel's dark skin, her cheap shoes, her nervous smile. "James, are you sure about this?" Rachel laughed it off at the time. James squeezed her hand and whispered, "Don't listen to them. You're all I need." But words are easy. Promises are cheap. And soon, Rachel would learn just how shallow his loyalty really was. The marriage started like a fairy tale. For a moment, she thought she'd finally made it. A home, a husband, and eventually, 3 little blessings. Her triplets. But behind closed doors, cracks formed fast. The comments from James's family never stopped. "She'll never fit in. She's just after your money. Those kids will never belong here." Each word chipped at her, cutting deeper than she ever admitted. And James? Instead of protecting her, instead of standing up for the woman who gave him everything, he stayed silent. Worse, he began to believe them. Money grew tighter. James grew colder. One night, during an argument, he spat the words Rachel still hears in her sleep. "You were nothing when I found you. And without me, you'll be nothing again." Her heart shattered. But she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She had 3 children to protect. And then, one morning, she woke up to find him gone. The house half empty. His ring left on the kitchen counter. James had walked out. Not just on her, but on their children too. Rachel thought that was the end. That life had broken her for good. But she didn't know then that pain would become her fire. And one day, she would walk into his perfect little world and set it on fire. The first months without James were the hardest. Rachel had no savings, no backup plan. Just 3 babies crying at night and bills piling on the kitchen counter. Her old neighborhood didn't make it easier. Some neighbors whispered, shaking their heads. She's raising 3 kids alone? She should have known better than to marry into that world. And some said worse, ugly words she'd been hearing her whole life. Words about her skin, her place, her worth. But Rachel didn't fold. She couldn't. Every morning, she dragged herself out of bed before dawn, packed bottles for the babies, and pushed a stroller to the bus stop in the freezing cold. She worked every shift she could find, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables during the day, sometimes both in the same 24 hours. One day, a woman at the diner sneered as Rachel served her food. 3 kids, no husband? Figures. You people never know how to keep a family together. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but instead, she smiled, placed the plate down, and walked away. Later that night, holding her babies in her arms, she whispered through tears, "They'll never know what you're worth. But I'll make sure you do." Those words became her vow. Months turned into years. The triplets grew, their laughter filling the tiny apartment they shared. Rachel traded old second-hand clothes for neat uniforms, scraped together just enough to buy books, and made sure her kids never felt the hunger she had once felt as a child. Still, the world never stopped reminding her of who it thought she was. At the grocery store, people stared when she paid with food stamps. At the park, mothers clutched their purses tighter when she sat on the same bench. At job interviews, she saw the way managers glanced at her skin before they asked about her experience. But every no only fueled her. Every insult made her stronger. One night, Rachel stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, exhaustion carved into her face. She whispered, "I won't just survive. I'll rise." She didn't know how yet. She didn't know when. But she knew one thing for sure: the woman James left behind was gone. And the woman she was becoming, one day, she would make the whole world see her worth. It started with a promotion. Rachel had been cleaning offices for nearly 2 years, her back aching from scrubbing floors, her hands rough from bleach and soap. But one night, the building manager stopped her as she was leaving. "You're one of the hardest workers I've ever seen," he said. "How would you feel about managing the night crew?" It wasn't much. A few extra dollars an hour. But to Rachel, it felt like the universe whispering, "You're moving forward." She cried that night in the kitchen, her kids watching her from the table. But these weren't tears of defeat. These were tears of hope. With time, the victories grew. She saved enough to buy a used car, no more dragging her kids through the snow for a bus ride. She saved enough to move out of the cramped apartment into a modest house with 3 tiny bedrooms. For the first time in years, she felt like she was building a real home. The triplets noticed it too. They laughed more. They dreamed bigger. One day, her daughter said, "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." Rachel nearly broke down right there. But even as her world got brighter, the shadows of prejudice never disappeared. At work, some employees resented her new role. She only got that job because the company wanted to look good. She doesn't even belong in management. Rachel heard it all. And every time, she reminded herself, their words don't define me. My results do. She learned to walk into rooms with her head held high, even when she was the only black woman there. She learned to speak with authority, even when people tried to talk over her. Slowly, people who once dismissed her began to respect her. But success has a way of traveling through whispers. One evening, as Rachel walked out of the office, she froze. Leaning against a sleek car parked outside was a man she thought she'd erased from her life. James. His smile was polished. His suit expensive. But his eyes, they were the same, cold, calculating. "Well, well," he said smoothly. "Look who made something of herself after all." Rachel's stomach knotted. Memories she had buried surged to the surface. She wanted to walk away. Pretend he wasn't there. But James wasn't the type to let go easily. He leaned closer. "You should come to my wedding," he whispered. "It'll be fun." Rachel's heart dropped. His wedding? And in that instant, she realized, James hadn't shown up to reconnect. He had shown up to humiliate her all over again. James's words echoed in Rachel's mind for days. "Come to my wedding. It'll be fun." She knew what he meant. He wanted her there as a spectacle. The poor black ex-wife, the girl his family always said was beneath them, paraded in front of his rich new bride and their polished guests. It wasn't an invitation. It was a setup, and Rachel felt the sting of it in her chest. For a week, she tried to ignore it. She threw herself into work, into her children, into everything that reminded her of the life she'd built without him. But the world is cruel in its timing. That Friday, her son came home from school, shoulders slumped. "Mom," he whispered, "a kid said Daddy's getting married. He said Daddy doesn't even care about us." Rachel's heart cracked. She pulled her boy close, fighting back tears. Her children still carried the weight of James's choices. His absence wasn't just hers to bear, it was theirs too. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the crumpled wedding invitation James had slipped into her purse. Her hands shook. Her breath was shallow. She remembered the nights she had cried alone. The mornings she dragged herself to work on no sleep. The stares. The whispers. The racism that tried to crush her spirit. And then she remembered something else, her daughter's voice. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." Rachel lifted her chin. She smoothed out the invitation. Maybe James wanted her to walk in broken. Humiliated. The living proof that his new life was better than the one he left behind. But that's not who she was anymore. She wasn't going to show up as the abandoned woman he thought she still was. She was going to show up as the woman she had become. Strong. Fierce. Unapologetic. And she wouldn't come alone. She would bring the very proof of her strength, her 3 children. Rachel circled the date on the calendar. She looked at her reflection in the window, her eyes glowing with a fire James had never seen before. "You wanted me there, James," she whispered. "Then be careful what you wish for." The wedding bells rang. The church was dressed in white roses, crystal chandeliers, and the smell of money. Guests in designer suits and gowns filled the pews, their laughter echoing under the high ceilings. James stood at the altar, straightening his tie. He looked every bit the successful man his family always wanted him to be. Beside him, his bride glowed in her gown, smiling proudly, certain she had won the prize. Everything was perfect, or so they thought. Outside, a black Cadillac Escalade rolled up to the curb. Its engine purred like a lion, sleek and commanding. Guests standing near the doors turned their heads as the tinted windows slid down. Rachel stepped out. The emerald dress hugged her frame, shimmering like fire under the sunlight. Her hair was flawless, her chin lifted. She looked like a queen stepping into her own kingdom. But she wasn't alone. The back doors opened, and 3 little pairs of polished shoes hit the ground. Her triplets, dressed sharp, their faces glowing with pride, took her hands. The gasps began instantly. "Is that Rachel? What is she doing here? She doesn't belong here." And then, the ugliest whisper slipped out from the crowd. "Of course she showed up. People like her always want attention." Rachel heard it. She always did. But this time, she didn't flinch. She looked down at her children, smiled, and whispered, "Heads high, babies." Always. As the heavy church doors opened, silence fell inside. The music stopped. The bride's smile froze. James's jaw went tight, his knuckles whitening around the ring box in his hand. Rachel's heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered, her children at her sides. Every whisper, every stare, every ounce of judgment followed her down that aisle. But for the first time, she wasn't shrinking under it. She was shining through it. James's bride leaned toward him, her voice a harsh whisper. "Who is she?" James didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the woman he once abandoned, the woman he thought would stay broken forever, had just walked into his wedding looking more powerful than he ever imagined. Rachel stopped halfway down the aisle, locked eyes with James, and said in a voice that carried through the entire church, "Congratulations, James. Looks like you finally got the fairy tale you always wanted. But tell me, did you tell her the whole story?" The bride blinked. The crowd erupted in whispers. "And James?" He froze. The church was a storm of whispers. Guests leaned into one another, covering their mouths, eyes darting between Rachel and the bride. The bride's voice trembled as she looked at James. "What is she talking about?" James forced a smile, though sweat glistened on his forehead. "She's just trying to ruin this day. Ignore her." But Rachel's laugh echoed through the church. "Ruin it? James, I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came here to tell the truth." The bride stiffened. "The truth?" Rachel glanced at the rows of staring faces. The same high society crowd that once laughed at her, whispered about her, dismissed her as the poor black girl who didn't belong. Her voice rose, steady and sharp. "The truth is, James doesn't just have a past. He has a family. A family he walked away from." Gasps rippled through the pews. The bride's smile vanished. Her hands shook as she turned to James. "What is she talking about?" James snapped, his voice booming. "Rachel, that's enough. You don't belong here. Get out before I—" "Before you what?" Rachel interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Before you tell them that you left me? That you abandoned your own children?" The triplets, clutching Rachel's hands, looked up at James with wide, silent eyes. The bride's knees buckled. She grabbed onto the podium for support. "Children? James, you told me you never had children." The crowd erupted again. People turned to each other, shaking their heads, whispering, "He lied. He lied to her." James tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "She's lying. She's trying to embarrass me." Rachel's voice cut sharper than glass. "Am I lying, James? Look at them." She gestured to the three little faces staring up at him. "Look your children in the eyes and tell this church they're not yours." The room fell into stunned silence. The bride's face drained of all color. Rachel's children shifted nervously, their little hands trembling in hers. Rachel squeezed them tight, whispering, "Don't be afraid. The truth always wins." James's mask was crumbling. His polished image, his wealthy groom persona, it was all slipping away in real time. And the bride. Her fairy tale was unraveling, thread by thread. She turned to James, her voice breaking. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me she's lying." But James couldn't. His lips moved, but no words came. And Rachel, standing tall in her emerald dress, delivered the line that shattered the room. "Your groom isn't the man you think he is. He's the man who left his wife and children because they didn't fit into his perfect little picture." The bride covered her mouth, shaking. The crowd gasped louder. And James, he finally exploded. James's hands balled into fists. His face turned red, veins pulsing at his temples. "Enough!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the church walls. "She doesn't matter. She never mattered." The bride flinched. The crowd gasped. Rachel didn't move. She stood rooted, her children behind her, their little hands gripping the folds of her dress. James's voice cracked with rage. "She was nothing. Just some broke little girl I took pity on. I gave her a life, and she still dragged me down. Look at me now. Do you think I'd ever admit those kids are mine?" The words were poison, and the whole room heard them. Rachel's chest tightened, but she refused to show pain. She knew this moment wasn't just about her, it was about her children. Her voice cut through his shouting, calm and unshakable. "Do you hear yourself, James? Do you hear what you're saying about your own blood?" The bride trembled. She turned toward him, her eyes wet with disbelief. "You lied to me. You told me you'd never been married. You told me you didn't have kids. You told me she was just—" "Stop!" James barked, desperation creeping into his tone. But the bride didn't stop. "You told me she was some crazy woman chasing you for money. You told me she made it all up." Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were glaring. Old women shook their heads. Men muttered curses under their breath. A couple of guests stood up, ready to leave. For years, James had worn his wealth like armor. But in that moment, everyone saw him for what he was, a coward who had abandoned his family and lied to build a fake life. Rachel finally took a step closer, her heels echoing on the marble. Her voice carried, strong and steady. "You can keep lying, James. But these children are the truth you can't erase. You can run from me, but you'll never run from them." The bride tore off her veil, her hands trembling as she ripped it free. "I can't do this. I can't marry a liar." James reached for her, but she slapped his hand away. "No. Don't touch me. You disgust me." The crowd erupted again. Gasps, murmurs, shouts. Rachel turned, her children clutching her hands, and began walking toward the door. The Cadillac Escalade was waiting outside, ready to carry her and her babies back to the life she had built with her own strength. But just as she reached the church doors, James shouted something that made the entire room freeze. "Rachel! If you walk out that door, you'll regret it. I'll make sure of it." The church went silent. The guests stared, and Rachel slowly turned back, her eyes blazing. Rachel stopped at the door. Her children's small hands clung to hers, their eyes wide with fear. The entire church had fallen into stunned silence, every guest frozen, waiting for her to respond. James's voice still echoed against the stained glass windows. "If you walk out that door, you'll regret it. I'll make sure of it." Rachel turned slowly, heels clicking against the marble floor like a drumbeat. Her emerald dress shimmered in the light as she faced him fully. And then she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not a broken one, just a laugh filled with truth and strength. "Regret it," she said, her voice slicing through the air. "James, my only regret was ever believing that you were a man worth standing beside." Gasps broke out among the crowd. She let go of her children's hands for just a moment and stepped forward. "Do you think you can scare me now? After everything I've been through? After every door slammed in my face, every whisper behind my back, every job that told me I wasn't the right fit because of my skin, every time I was told I wasn't good enough?" Her voice rose, filling every corner of the church. "You thought leaving me would destroy me. But look at me, James. I survived without your money, without your name, without your so-called power. I built a life. I raised 3 beautiful children on my own. And today, I walked in here not as your ex-wife, but as the woman you could never break." The crowd was no longer whispering, they were clapping. Slowly at first, then louder. A ripple of applause swept through the pews, people nodding, women wiping their eyes, men muttering, "Amen." Rachel turned back to her children, kneeling down to meet their eyes. "Do you hear that?" she whispered softly. "That's the sound of truth. That's the sound of us standing tall." Her daughter smiled through her tears. Her sons squeezed her shoulders, their little faces glowing with pride. James stumbled, his perfect tuxedo now drenched in sweat, his voice cracking as he tried to regain control. You think they care about you? You think showing up in some car and making a scene makes you powerful? You're nothing, Rachel. You'll always be nothing." But this time, no one believed him. Not the guests. Not the bride, who now stood behind Rachel, her arms crossed, glaring at James with disgust. Rachel rose to her full height again, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Nothing," she said. "James, look around you. The only nothing here is the man who abandoned his own blood." The room went wild, claps, shouts, murmurs of agreement. James's face twisted with rage, but he couldn't stop it. Because Rachel had taken the stage that was supposed to humiliate her, and turned it into her throne. She gathered her children close, ready to walk out with her head high. But just before she stepped through the doors, a voice rose from the crowd, one that changed everything. "Rachel, wait. They deserve to hear the rest. Tell them what he did to you." All eyes turned back to Rachel, and James's face drained of all color. Rachel froze. Her children looked up at her, confused. The crowd leaned in, their breaths held. "Tell them what he did to you," the voice had said. And in her heart, Rachel knew this was her moment. Not for revenge. Not for spite. For freedom. She turned back toward the altar, her chin high, her voice calm but unshakable. "You all see James standing here in his tuxedo, looking like the perfect groom. But you don't know the man behind the suit." The bride swallowed hard, bracing herself. Rachel's voice grew sharper, her words carrying to every corner of the church. When I married him, I was young, naive. I believed in love more than money, in loyalty more than status. But from the beginning, his family told him I wasn't good enough. Not because I wasn't loving. Not because I wasn't loyal. But because of my skin. Because I wasn't the woman they wanted to display in their rich, white circles. A ripple of shock swept through the guests. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others sat up straighter, as if the truth had just slapped them across the face. Rachel's hand trembled, but she steadied it by gripping her daughter's shoulder. I gave him everything. My heart. My youth. And when those children were born, our children, I thought he'd change. I thought fatherhood would make him proud. But instead, he saw us as a stain on his image. Something he had to erase. Gasps cut through the silence. The bride's lips parted, tears slipping down her cheeks. Rachel continued, her voice breaking for just a moment. I begged him. I begged him not to leave. Not for me, but for them. For 3 little babies who only wanted their father. But James chose money. He chose appearances. He chose to pretend we didn't exist. She looked James dead in the eye. You didn't just leave a wife, James. You abandoned your blood. You abandoned love. And you did it because you were too ashamed to be seen as the man who loved a black woman and raised her children. The church went silent. Dead silent. James's mask was gone. No lies left. No excuses. The bride dropped her bouquet, the flowers scattering across the marble. Her voice shook with rage as she looked at him. You lied about everything. And worse, you broke them. I can't marry a man like you. She tore the ring off her finger and hurled it to the floor. The sound echoed through the church like a gavel striking down judgment. Rachel gathered her children close. The Cadillac Escalade waited outside, sunlight streaming through the stained glass like a blessing. But before she left, she turned back one last time. Her voice was soft now, but strong enough to pierce James to his core. You wanted me here to humiliate me, James. But today, you humiliated yourself. And with that, she walked out, heels clicking, triplets holding her hands, every guest rising to watch the queen leave her throne. James stood frozen at the altar, stripped of everything, his bride, his lies, his pride. Outside, Rachel took a deep breath. Her children climbed into the Escalade, laughing, proud. She looked at the sky and whispered to herself, I survived. I won. And deep down, she knew, this wasn't just her victory. It was proof that no prejudice, no abandonment, no cruelty could erase her worth. The Escalade glided away from the church, sunlight bouncing off its black frame. Inside, Rachel's children giggled, asking questions, their little voices filling the air with joy. Rachel smiled, but her mind was heavy. She replayed the scene in her head, the gasps, the whispers, James's face as his lies crumbled, the bride's tears, the sound of the ring hitting the floor. And for the first time in years, she felt free. She pulled over for a moment, letting the car rest on the side of the road. Her children looked at her, puzzled. Mommy, are you okay? Rachel turned to them, her eyes soft and shining. Yes, baby. Mommy's more than okay. She reached back and squeezed their little hands. Do you know what today taught us? That no matter how much someone tries to shame you, no matter how much they try to erase you, truth and love will always rise. Her daughter tilted her head. So Daddy was wrong? Rachel nodded gently. Yes. Daddy was wrong. He thought leaving us made him stronger. But real strength is staying. Real strength is loving your family when it's hard. Real strength is standing tall when the world wants to see you crawl. Her sons leaned in close, their eyes wide. And you're strong, Mommy. Tears filled Rachel's eyes. She kissed their little foreheads. No, babies. We're strong. Together. She started the car again, the engine humming like a promise of better days ahead. Back at the church, James was left in ruins, alone, humiliated, stripped of the image he had worked so hard to build. His lies lay shattered around him, and the people who once admired him now turned their backs. But Rachel, she drove away in dignity, because her worth had never depended on James. It had always been hers. And here's the truth. Life will always have people like James, people who judge you, abandon you, and underestimate you because of where you come from, how you look, or what they think you're worth. But those people don't define you. You define you. And Rachel's story reminds us all. Strength isn't in revenge. Strength isn't in wealth. Strength is in surviving, in rising, in holding your head high when the world tries to push it down. If you're still watching right now, this part is for you. What would you have done if you were Rachel? Would you have walked into that wedding, or stayed away? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Because at the end of the day, your story, your voice, your truth, can inspire the world.